Hello, welcome to Excelling Psychology. This is Jyotika. In today's class, I want to discuss how you should be writing your answers for your AS course studies in paper 1. I have taken the Pozzulo et al. Study as an example for this lesson, but whatever tips I share are not limited to only how you should write answers for the Pozzulo study. Those tips are applicable for any studies for which you are writing answers. I have taken Pozzulo because many students keep requesting that I should cover the new studies, which are in the 24-26 syllabus. Students learn a lot of content. They memorize the entire content that's given in the textbook, but we see that they are at a loss when it comes to writing answers in the paper. In the paper, undoubtedly they check the content which you have learnt, but the content needs to be reflected in your answers. They are not going to check the content which is there in your head. They are going to check the content that you write in the paper according to the requirements of the questions which are given. So what should be your priority is learning exam writing skills, practicing answer writing, not rereading the lessons multiple times or listening and making the teacher explain 100 times. No matter how many times you read or listen to explanations and how well you've learned the studies, you will not be able to score well unless you know how to put down the content correctly in response to the questions given. Questions can come in any permutations and combinations in the paper. There is no predicting which questions will come in a psychology paper, so you have to be ready to answer any type of questions. How you would be ready is by practicing answer writing. So in my classes we practice answer writing right from the word go, and today, as I've mentioned, we are going to be looking at some answers of Pozzulo et al. These have been written by one of my students. Wherever she has answered questions correctly, I will point out what is good about those answers and how you should try writing in the same way. Wherever she has made mistakes, I'll point out what those mistakes are and give you suggestions for improvement. Wherever she has not been able to write answers, we'll see how we could have written those answers. Okay, so without much ado, I'm starting with the lesson, and I'll try to keep the video short. Students tell me they don't want very much of an in-depth analysis. They don't like very long videos. So I'll be informative. I won't compromise on that. But at the same time, I'll try to keep the video brief. Okay, the first question they've asked us is, name one cartoon character that participants had to identify in the target present condition. The student has written Dora. This is correct. As you know, the other option is Diego. For these type of questions, don't even bother writing complete sentences. You just answer to the point. Strictly one word, two word answers are fine. Save your time just as she has. These are purely AO1 type of answers, descriptive. So just expected to write whatever you have learned in the book. Coming to the next question, state one result of the study. Any question that asks you for a result or evidence or data, look out for these words in the question. They want figures or they want numbers. I hope you know that conclusions and results are different. So in conclusion type of questions, you do not give figures. But for results type of questions, findings questions, you give numbers. Most of the studies in the syllabus have produced quantitative data. So you'll have some frequency, some percentage, some mean that you're remembering for every study. Make sure those are mentioned. Now the student has written this answer really well. What she's done is first she's put the result in words, and then to support what she's written in words, she's given concrete figures from the study. Ideally, any results answer should be written this way. So let's quickly look at what she has written. She has written children were better at identifying familiar cartoon faces in the target present lineups than unfamiliar human faces. And to justify this, then she gives the success rates also. So for children, the success rates were 0.99 for cartoon faces and 0.23 for unfamiliar human faces. This is a really good answer. The next question is outline two independent variables that were manipulated in the study. The command term is outlined. What has been asked for is two independent variables that were manipulated in the study. First, let's look at the command term. Outline means we just have to specify. Looking at the marks, 4 marks, we see that each variable has to be written for 2 marks. Now just naming the independent variable. For example, if I say one independent variable is type of face, would definitely not justify 2 marks, and it would also not justify the command term outline. Outline means specifying, not just naming. So the command term is not name or identify, it's outline. So that the student has done really well. She has named the independent variable and then giving the levels of the IV which are there. That is how it should be written. IV should always be presented along with its levels when it comes to 2 markers. 2 markers in the sense when any one IV has been asked for 2 marks. Unfortunately, a mistake she's made. In fact, this mistake has been made by several students on this type of a question. They've asked for independent variables that were manipulated. She has mentioned one independent variable that was only measured, not manipulated, which is age. This gets marked as incorrect. Here what we realize, what we learn from this answer is, we need to read the question very carefully. Students keep a lookout for the command term, they keep a lookout for the marks, but that does not mean that you ignore the rest of the question. You have to read the entire question. Very clearly it has been specified you have to talk about the variables that are manipulated in the study. Researchers have not manipulated age. They have taken participants as it is, some children and some adults. They have not caused them to become children or adults. So we cannot say that was manipulated. The second variable which is given, that is right. Nature of target faces. Look at how she names the variable and then she specifies the levels also. Familiar cartoon characters, unfamiliar human faces. This is an excellent way of writing. Had she identified the other independent variable also correctly, she would have scored really well. The other independent variable was the type of lineup. This was manipulated by the researchers as target present or target absent. As you know, in the Pozzulo et al. Study, there are 3 independent variables, out of which 2 are manipulated and 1 is measured. It is these type of things that you need to understand when you're learning. When you rote learn, this is the mistake which you make. You just say, okay, independent variables 1, 2, 3, and when it comes to the paper, okay, 1 and 2, I'm naming those. That is why rote learning is so discouraged, and you need to understand what you're learning, because then this is the type of mistake you end up making, because you've not understood the difference between a manipulated and a measured variable. Previously in the syllabus, there were natural experiments which have been deleted this year, which has made it all the more difficult for students to understand how independent variables are not necessarily manipulated always. You need to have your core concepts clear though when there are studies like this in the syllabus. Let's come to the next question. Describe the psychology investigated in the study. What is very good about the current syllabus is they have started specifying exactly which terms you need to explain under psychology being investigated. So there's very little room for mistake. Till the last syllabus, it would not be mentioned exactly which terms have to be taken, so students would get very confused exactly what to cover. This year, there's no scope for making mistakes for 2 reasons. One, they have specified in the syllabus. Second, the textbook, the Hodder textbook, is such an excellent textbook that in the section under psychology investigated, they have separately given sections for each term that has been specified in the syllabus. That's what you need to understand and write properly in the paper. It's as simple as that. Still, I've seen students making mistake on this question. Like for Pozzulo et al., simply you have to explain eyewitness testimony and false positives. That's what's written in the syllabus. Still, students will go into explaining things like reconstructive memory of Loftus and Palmer. Some of them would explain different types of lineup like simultaneous, sequential. I'm not saying those things are not relevant. They are. They have direct bearing on the study, but they are not under what is psychology being investigated. You're not expected to write that. Then why are you covering those things? That's why, as I mentioned previously, and I'm reiterating, exam oriented preparation, that's the only thing that can help you. Psychology being investigated in general is always about concepts and their explanations. I've even seen at the worst students giving results in psychology being investigated. What is psychology? Mind and behavior. So they want to know about which processes of the mind or behavior have been investigated in a study. How will results figure up in that type of a question? Students, like, it seems like they start giving arbitrary things. Procedure, results, anything coming in psychology being investigated. As I said, I don't want to get into a detailed discussion, but just note this, that psychology is about the concepts of the study and your understanding of the concepts, nothing else. So in this study, eyewitness testimony, firstly, she's defined it very well. Whenever there's an accident or crime and someone is interrogated by the police, so they have to explain what they've seen, heard or smelled. That is eyewitness testimony. Then she goes further to explain what is the use of eyewitness testimony. They help in legal proceedings, they help to catch the culprit. So the meaning, the usefulness of the concept of eyewitness testimony, that is excellent. Also, she connects it with the next concept, false positive response. See the phrasing, see the use of the term in relation to this. Connectors are very important. As I always explain in the class, lead-in phrases from one sentence to the next, connectors. It makes it so easy for the examiner to understand. The reading becomes so easy, and for the student also to keep track of what they are writing and to understand correctly themselves what they are writing. These type of connectors are excellent. If she was just to list out, okay, 1 eyewitness testimony, 2 false positive, what is their relation with each other, why are they coming together, would not show her understanding, and it's abrupt for the examiner also. How did it shift from eyewitness testimony to false positives? So small things which are not really small, they really improve your writing. Keep a lookout for those things. So in relation to this, false positive is when the eyewitness incorrectly chooses a foil. Okay, definitely I feel that here she could have explained what's a foil. That would make the answer even better. So foil, as you know, is an alternative that has just been kept for distraction purposes. So if she could have explained that, that would have been good. But it's alright. She's given a correct definition. And she's also mentioned something about social pressure. She's mentioned that children are more likely to show false positives, which is highly relevant to this study. So you can see both the concepts that are required to be explained in psychology investigator. She's made sure to cover both of them, given really good explanations of each, and showed their usefulness or their bearing in the Pozzulo study. This is a very good way of writing the answer. Okay, so the next question is a simple descriptive one again, aims of the study. So one aim was to investigate whether children are less able to recognize human faces, and another was to see whether false positives are more in children rather than in adults. Both the aims are very clearly specified. The words used to investigate, that's the best way of specifying the aim of a study. Aims could be asked for any study. The best approach is to learn the aims for each and every study. Most papers, they do ask the aim for some study or the other. And one more tip I could give is learn at least 2 aims for each study wherever applicable. If there's a study which has only 1 aim, then you have only that one to learn. If there are more than 1 aims, then at least 2 you should know for each. Generally they don't exceed 2 aims in the paper. Sometimes though they can ask specifically for some aim. So for Dement and Kleitman, give an aim related to pattern of eye movements, or for Pozzulo, give an aim relating to ability to recognize human faces. So if that's what they do, then you have to know exactly which aim they've asked for. Prepare 2 aims as such on a priority basis, like know 2 aims really well, and if there's a 3rd or 4th aim also in the study, make sure you know it well. You don't have to learn it on priority, but read through it well. There's nothing much to discuss about an aim question, so this is all I have to suggest. Okay, the next question comes to give one reason why this study can be said to be ethical. The point that the student has given is good, that the participants were not deceived at any point. This is correct. They were informed before the study and were made clear about the procedure. Now here it becomes problematic. This is a very generic response. In any study in which participants have been informed about the procedure and have not been deceived, I could write exactly this sentence without any change and it would apply to that study also. Generic answers make you lose 50% marks. Generic answers are those which could fit into any study, which don't show any special critical thinking on part of the student. And if I say exactly what it is not contextualizing the answer, not referring to the study in making the answer. So here, when as an examiner I read this answer, they were informed before the study began about the clear procedure of the study. The immediate question that comes to my mind, what procedure? What were they informed about? Means I'm left begging for the answer for this question. That's not good. Specify in terms of Pozzulo et al. Or whichever study you're saying, what was that procedure that they were made aware of. Again, students read the textbook a lot and then they make this mistake. I fail to understand. In the textbook they always write so well, always contextualizing everything, giving points very specifically. You need to look out for those. That's why mindless reading is different from mindful reading. You need to read mindfully. When you see in the textbook, they've made a point like participants were not deceived. They've mentioned in the textbook, and anyways you should know, they were not deceived about the fact that they would have to watch videos and then answer some questions on photo arrays that were presented in connection to those videos. If you read the textbook in a way such that for every sentence they have given, you think about why have they presented it like this, or how have they connected this to the study, what is this style of writing. So if you critically think about what is written in the textbook, that is how the textbook is worth reading. It takes effort, it takes mental effort to read that way, but that's the correct way of reading. If you're just going to read from a memorization point of view, or I just need points, I need points for my answers, so I need to memorize some points like deception was there, not there, consent was there, not there, withdrawal was there, not, like a checklist. If you're just going to go on reading and marking in your mind, then this is the type of mistake which you make. You've not thought through carefully what is written in the book. Okay, so make sure not to write generic answers. That's a big no. Makes you lose 50% marks directly. Even more if it's not clear at all what you're talking about. Write only contextualized answers. What I mean by contextualized is which refer to the study in question, which make use of wording of the study while writing. Generic answers do not do so. So avoid them at all costs. In fact, what I suggest is, I know this is a long discussion, but still this is very important. Whenever you're writing your answers, this should be your top priority, or the thing that's always running in the back of your mind. You need to keep asking yourself, have you contextualized the answer? Have you made it specific to the study asked about or to the scenario given in the paper? Because there's no point of writing otherwise. Generic answers are not going to get you anywhere. Okay, let's come to the next question. Okay, so the next question reads, explain one strength and one weakness of reliability in the study. One strength, one weakness, reliability, command term, explain. All of these are very important wordings of the question, so I've repeated them. This answer has been written really well. To support reliability, to give the strength, the student mentions that there were standardized procedure and instructions. I mean, look at how she begins. She directly addresses the question. She specifies the reason directly for why she's saying the study is reliable. She scores a mark right there. And then she contextualizes it. She writes in reference to the study what she means by a standardized procedure and instructions. Now, one thing is, I've pointed out to her also several times, I would like to tell you, don't use abbreviations like PPs and Ps, and I don't know how PPs also stands for participants. Okay, but mention the entire term. When you're writing an essay, it might seem immaterial to you, but it's very important to know how to write well, and this counts for good writing. Writing full forms, writing in formal tone. This is not formal tone of writing, PPs and Ps. What terms you use in the classroom or for yourself, those are not the way of writing. Anyways, I don't want to get into that. For now, just note participants is what you need to write. How she relates it to the study. She says that the videos that they would be shown and the questions that they would be asked about, they all were standardized. So she has specified like how the timings were fixed for not only the videos and the photos, but also for the filler task that followed later. So that means for every participant, the study was done in the same way. And then she also mentions that increases replicability of the study. Any researcher could follow this fixed procedures and verify the results for themselves. Excellent way of writing. You can also see she does the same thing for the weakness. For the weakness, she specifies that in the 2-minute filler task, when it came to the children, there could be some modification of the procedure for some of the children. As we've seen in the study, some of them asked 2 questions, some were asked 3, depending on how much they were willing to provide information. That means there is some inconsistency in how different children have been asked questions, and that is what she says reduces reliability. Further elaborating on it, she also explains that replicability would be difficult in this case, because any other researcher who was trying to do the same study, they would not know exactly how many questions to ask the children, then 2 or 3. One thing is, yes, she could have reduced a bit on the length by not specifying so much about replicability. What she's done is, because there have been guidelines that in the 10 markers, whenever you mention reliability, you should talk about replicability. She's picked it up from there, that tip she's picked up from there, and she's used it in the 4 marker as well. Not very necessary to have done that for a 4 marker, but anyways, the answer is very well written and shows a lot of critical thinking. So she scores a full 4. What we learn from this answer is many things. Directly addressing the question in the first sentence, naming what we are going to talk about straight away, and then elaborating on those things or contextualizing those things in the following sentences. That's a very good way of writing the answer. Okay, let's come to the next question. Here they've asked, explain one way which the instructions given to children were those given different from those given to adults. Okay, this is also a simple question. When it came to the photo array lineup, the children just had to point out to the photos of the culprit, whoever they thought it was. And when it came to the adults, they had to write their answers on a sheet of paper rather than pointing out. Very to the point. It's a descriptive question. Straight away she's answered. She's not given any unnecessary details like trying to justify, okay, the children were small so they wouldn't be able to do it and the adults could write themselves. No beating around the bush. The question is straightforward. They've just asked for one way in which children and adults had different instructions. They've not asked for any reasoning. They've not asked for a strength or why or how this was done. So even she does not do anything unnecessary in the answer. Very good way of writing again. 1 mark for this type of answer is for saying how children had to do it, so they had to point out, and another mark is for how the adults had to do it, recorded on the sheet of paper. So easily she scores these 2 marks. The next is a very descriptive question, the procedure type, which this is the one which you can really just learn from the textbook and write. What is important, like what I can suggest in terms of tips for writing these type of answers which have to do with any of the procedures. First of all, read the question very carefully. Often they do mention like this, like when the video started till they were tested on the photo array lineups. So they've given you like a boundary. You have to cover within this much part only. So don't write anything that was done before watching the videos or anything that was done after looking at the photo array lineups. Be limited or stay within the scope of what the question has asked. That is key. And another thing is be logical, sequential, step by step. In the sense, be clear in what you're writing. Don't give arbitrary points from here or there. Take a minute, sort it out in your head what was done, instead of Oh, one point I remembered, something they had to do in between was some questions. Okay, let me write the question first. Oh, but then I remember before they were asked the questions, they had to they were told that they would be asked some questions. Okay, now let me write about that. If in your mind things are jumbled up, first sort it out in your mind. Make sure it's there in a logical order in your mind, and then only write it down. Don't just start writing the way it comes to your mind. Don't be fanatic in what you write. The students are so worried about the time, and they just lose clarity of thought because of that. Taking a minute to think about how to write would be much better than messing it up fully and then having to cancel the whole thing and rewrite. So take your time, give that 1 minute, sort it out in your head, make sure, okay, this is going to be my first, second, third, okay, it's a 5 marks answer. I need to have 5 sequential points. Sorry, here it's 4. I need to have 4 sequential points. These are going to be my 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then only write it in the paper. Okay, now let's look at what this student has written. She has mentioned that first they were asked to pay attention. They were told they would be asked questions later. She specified the questions that were asked. Then she's mentioned about a filler task that had to be done. She has mentioned that the procedure is identical for all types of participants. She has also mentioned that how the participants were given instructions before the photo array lineup could take place, and then how it was presented on the software where children had to point out and adults just had to write down what they were seeing. Excellent. Again, she's covered everything. You can see with questions, exact questions that were asked to the children. She's made sure to specify that the children and the adults were undergoing the same procedure. So she's not left any room for ambiguity for the examiner. Like if I was someone who didn't know what happened in the study and I was just to read what she's written, I would understand fully what happened in this part of the procedure. That's also a very effective tip for writing. When you're writing, assume that the examiner does not know what has happened in the study. So that helps you to make sure you don't leave any room for doubt. You clarify exactly what is there. One thing is always about the length. Like if you see this student has a tendency to write longer answers. One thing is the way the paper is given. So this paper which I had given her, the lines are not exactly the same way that they are given in the actual exam paper. So that's why also she tends to exceed the lines, because the lines are not presented properly. Otherwise also she has a tendency towards writing little more detailed answers because she tends to include lot of specific details. If she would have skipped 1 or 2 points, like if she should have cut short a little from year to year, even that wouldn't have affected. Her answer is really good. There are 4 exclusive points that can get 4 marks. It's sequential also. Still, I think it's worthy of merit what she's written end to end. Okay, let's come to the next question. Now here you'll see difficulties begin. As far as descriptive questions are concerned, most students keep gliding through nicely through those questions. Once it comes to more critical thinking, we see some mistakes start being made. Although this student has written the 10 marker really well later. Okay, let's see. One question that's asked here is explain one weakness of performing laboratory experiment in this study. This is in fact a question that qualifies for both paper 1 and paper 2. Because one, it has to do with the course study. Second, it has to do with research method of laboratory experiment. Okay, what she says is the video clips were not real, they were artificial. Now looking at this sentence, it doesn't make full sense. Like what does she mean by videos are artificial? And somewhere it seems little odd also to say that videos were artificial. But then in the next sentence she explains it quite well. So what she says is that participants would have not been able to remember the culprit as well in real life if they had to see real incidents in front of them rather than just watching video. And she justifies why this is the case. She mentions because in real life there would be some sensory stimulation, like there would be smells, sounds. She could have also added they would be worried in real life or they would be shocked by what had happened. But whatever she's justified is excellent. So she scores full 2. She's written it really well. Though what I would suggest instead of this sentence, a little improvement, scope for improvement here would be to say because it's a laboratory experiment, ecological validity is poor. She's implied that only, but she hasn't used the term ecological validity, which is known to be a weakness of laboratory experiments. So if she would have begun with that, and then the second sentence she would have given as it is for justification like she has, the answer would look even better. But I don't want to nitpick. She has mentioned artificiality, realism. That's as good as saying that ecological validity was missing. Okay, the next one is a descriptive question. Again, outline 2 reasons why the participants were asked to complete demographic and cartoon watching form. I think it was the parents of participants who were asked this. Okay, whatever it is, the reason she's given really well. 1, to check the estimate of how long the child spent watching cartoons, and the other was to see how much time they spend watching those 2 cartoons in particular, Dora and Diego. So again, very well. She's answered. The only thing we can take from this, again, the command term is outline. So instead of just naming, like instead of just saying how long they spent watching TV and how much they knew the cartoons, and not specifying which are the cartoons, or not specifying that in the case of television, cartoons on television is what they wanted to know about. That is where she would have lost marks, and some students do make these type of mistakes. Outline means be complete. It's one step above just naming or identifying something, and she's done that by clearly linking whatever she's saying with the study. Let's come to the next question. Explain one assumption of the cognitive approach. The assumption she's written correctly, that there are individual differences in thinking, behaving and feeling in terms of language, attention, all those cognitive processes. So this is undoubtedly correct. Where students make a mistake is having to connect some portion of the study with the assumption. Here they've asked to connect a finding from the study with the assumption, and here she makes a mistake. Firstly, she does not give a finding. She talks about the procedure. Also, she confuses and somewhere contradicts her own previous answer, because she says that when they saw, heard or smelt the video, at that time there might have been some differences in how they were performing. Now, firstly, she herself has mentioned that when people are watching videos, there is no sensory stimulation of this type. So I think she's got really confused over here. Secondly, that's not the point of difference in this study. In this study, the difference which we see is in terms of how children process videos and photographs and how adults process them. So when we talk about individual differences, in this study we are seeing those individual differences in terms of age, whether it's a child or it is an adult. And in terms of which behaviors are we seeing the difference? In terms of their perception, we could say, or their thinking about the type of face that is shown in the video, like is it a human or a cartoon face. So as always, as you do for any other question, when you give an assumption also, there's things like individual difference. What is the individual difference in this study? Cognitive process, which cognitive process? Think in those terms and then write it that way. Also, very importantly, as I was explaining in one results related question, they've asked for one finding. How one finding relates to the assumption. What she's mentioned, firstly, it's incorrect, no doubt, but it's something to do with the procedure, watching the video clips. That's not a finding of the study. Finding is a result. So here, firstly, she needs to think what she would talk about in her head. So she would talk about how children and adults differ in their perception of adult and human faces, or how children and adults differ in terms of their thinking or information processing of human and cartoon faces. That's what she wants to say. Now, which is the finding that is supporting this statement that she's making about individual differences? One finding is that children had 0.99 accuracy in identifying cartoon faces. Adults had 0.95. So marginally only, but children were better at identifying the cartoon faces. So that shows an individual difference when it comes to cognitive capacity of children and adults. So that's how she needed to relate it, by giving these figures, because it's a finding question. So this answer is too muddled up and confused. It's become incorrect also, like it's become illogical also. So this would get a 0 on the paper. Assumption type of questions, what has happened is even in the new textbook, they've not directly addressed it. They must have definitely assumed that it's easy for students to do, but students are really getting very confused, or I don't know what, with these assumption questions. They're just not practicing them, so they're being taken aback when these are asked. Most of the times I'm seeing students are doing very poorly in relating assumptions to findings or procedures of study. So make sure you practice much more of this. Okay, next is describe one weakness of the sampling technique used to recruit children. I don't know, she's not even mentioned the sampling technique. As you know, the sampling technique is opportunity. From your research methods, which hopefully you have learned before learning the course studies, you should know what's the weakness of an opportunity sample. It is that it is unrepresentative of the target population. And now it is just a matter of relating this point to the study. So you just have to think in what terms the children are unrepresentative of all children who have to give eyewitness testimonies. So these children were taken from private schools. I think they were taken from 3 private schools in Ontario. But when it comes to children who have to give eyewitness testimonies, not necessarily they would be only from private schools, they could be from anywhere. So then they might not represent children from other schools. If you want to be even more concrete, though I don't think the mark limit really allows that, but when it comes to children studying in private schools, their cognitive processes could be slightly better because they're getting better training in terms of education in their school. So their perception or information processing capacity might be just a little better than those in public schools. That's one possibility. So that's why results might not generalize to the findings that, children are better in identifying cartoon faces might not generalize to other children in the population. It means there are many ways of writing the answer. The essence is to point out how opportunity sampling is unrepresentative or not generalizable. Because nothing's written here, the student scores a 0. So how she should have written is first by thinking generally what's the weakness of opportunity sampling and then trying to relate it to the study. A thing that's relevant here I would like to discuss very briefly is the question of memorizing. When you go to memorize for every study, like this would be a strength of opportunity, that would be a weakness, becomes very difficult to cram and write so much. So if you're a student who's taking that approach, you might find yourself at a loss for some of the questions, like you're jogging through your memory but you can't remember was it there in the textbook or not. Like I have students in the beginning, when they start tuition with me, they come and ask, like if I ask them any question, oh, but that was not there in the textbook. That is their standard response. I hear it multiple times. One thing is, everything is not going to be in the textbook. Secondly, if you think you have that excellent a memory that you can memorize every word in the textbook, and in the paper you just scan through the book like mentally and you pick out from there what was the weakness of the sampling technique. I don't know how many students are brilliant enough to have that type of memory to remember. So always the better approach is to think about what was the sample in general, what is the weakness of that sample, and then try to apply it to the study. I mean, it makes life much easier, in my opinion, than having to memorize so much and write. But if you're the one who finds memorizing easier, then all the best, because you'd have some difficulty finding every point in the textbook. Then in that case, inevitably you'll have to leave out those answers for which the questions were not there in the textbook. And really the authors of the textbook can't be blamed for it. There are so many possible questions, you can't expect them to cover each and everything. Okay, let's come to the next question. Identify 2 things that were same about all the photographs used in the study. This is a descriptive question, answered really well. They were all in black and white, they were tightly cropped. Identifies the command term, means we have to be very to the point. Really good answer. Next is explain 2 similarities between the lab experiment and field experiment using Pozzulo. So there are going to be many students with the same argument here that I mentioned previously. Oh, but it's not there in the textbook. Okay, so the similarities between lab and field experiment, first to think of them generally. Both have a feature which is called manipulation of the independent variable. Or you could also put this as investigation of a cause-effect relationship. Another feature could be that they both delineate a dependent variable and they measure that dependent variable. Okay, first let's complete with this feature. So manipulation is one feature. In Pozzulo, manipulation was done in terms of, we've just seen, type of lineup, type of face. You could take any one independent variable as the example and do specify how it was manipulated, like target absent, target present. It's only for 4 marks, so I wouldn't recommend giving an example from another study, which is a field experiment. But in case it was for 6 marks, you could have given an example from 𝗵𝗫𝗬𝗖𝗛 et al. In that, the independent variable was the condition of the victim, which was manipulated as being either drunk or ill. So that shows you how manipulation is common to both types of experiment. Now for the other point, there are so many possibilities. As I mentioned earlier, measurement of the dependent variable. Standardization to an extent will be there in both, though it will be higher in a lab experiment, but it's there in a field experiment also. Some degree of control could be found in both. Quantitative data is generally collected in all types of experiments. So quantitative data is likely to be collected in both. There are so many points that we could give. For now, let me just take standardization. It's found to an extent in both types. So if we take Pozzulo et al., we've already seen that answer, how many things were standardized. The duration of the video clips, the duration of lineups, the presentation of the lineups with the black and white photographs, the positioning of the target, having the 𝗖𝗫𝗟𝗏 instead of the target when the target was absent. There are so many things to mention for standardization. If it was a 6-marker, a typical paper 2 type of question, and we had to give an example from 𝗵𝗫𝗬𝗖𝗛 also, in that case we could have mentioned in 𝗵𝗫𝗬𝗖𝗛 standardization was there in terms of how the victim always stood next to the pole in the critical area, always collapsed after exactly 70 seconds, and then modeling was offered after 70 or 150 seconds, those type of things. Okay, coming to the next question, explain 2 controls employed in the study. Now this is one question students do very poorly on, controls question. I don't know why they're not prepared for it at all. Firstly, if you look at it only, the answer, just if you take an overview without even reading it, it looks incomplete, because how can it be so brief? Okay, generally length does positively correlate with coverage or detail. So you're just saying that both males and females actors were Caucasian, but how does it matter? How does it serve to be a control? What is it controlling for? I mean, the command term is explain. This is like just outlining the thing and leaving it. Next is the clips were 6 seconds long and there was only 1 character per clip. Again, how does this serve as a control? And to some extent it sounds more like standardization to me rather than a control. One thing before I discuss the answer written by these students. In this study, the controls are so simple, like having tightly cropped and black and white photographs so that the brightness of clothing worn by Dora and Diego would not be a reason for identification. I mean, the control is so clearly given and it's explained also then and there. So that would have been a very easy answer to write here. It's been justified fully. Or the control over participant variables by having a repeated measures design and getting all the participants to answer about both human and cartoon faces or both target present and target absent conditions, so that their natural perception or natural memory ability would not become a reason for the difference in the identification. I mean, as simple as that. So unnecessary perception of difficulty in these type of questions. They are not difficult at all. Whenever they ask you to explain 2 controls, you outline the controls and you justify why they were maintained. So here if I take, okay, both were Caucasian and they were 22-year-olds. Why that is a control? Because otherwise differences in their age or their ethnicity would have made it easy for participants to memorize either one of them, either the male or female. For example, if the participant was white in ethnicity and the male or female in the video was also white, so maybe because of similarity they would be able to remember them better. You need to justify in this way. Where is the reasoning for this? Same way, the clips were 6 seconds long and there was only one character. Firstly, don't combine two things. Are we talking about the 6 seconds or are we talking about one character? Now if we say they were for 6 seconds, why is the duration having any bearing on memory? Like, is more than 6 seconds very long, so it becomes easier to memorize, or less than 6 seconds is very short, so they won't even be able to see the character? That's one way of putting it. Or we could talk about having only one character. Like, having multiple characters would have made it difficult to be able to see everyone's face before the lineup could be presented. Something like that. I mean, take either one and give a justification for it instead of naming two things which we are not able to figure out how they are serving as controls. Practice your control questions very well. They're not difficult at all, and again, it is good for your own thinking also. When you see any controls in a study, thinking about why the researchers would have kept them really develops your critical thinking as well. So that's why it's very important to not read the controls but understand the controls of a study. Okay, let's come to the next one. This is a really simple one. State one feature of the sample. The adults were aged between 17 and 36. Most students answer these type of questions well. The only mistake I have seen is unnecessarily giving too many sample features. Doesn't cut down on your marks. They'll reward you a mark for one right feature. But why make the examiner go through so much? And more than that, why waste your precious time when they've asked you for one feature to list out 10-20 features? What is that going to achieve? Okay, let's come to the 10 marker, the last question. Evaluate the study by Pozzulo et al. In terms of 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses. Now here there are a lot of merits in this answer to learn from. One thing, the student begins with very good lead-in phrases like one strength, then she mentions another strength. Really a very good way of writing. One weakness, like imagine you were the examiner, just have some empathy with the examiner. It becomes so easy for you to read. The moment you start reading a point, you know, okay, here she's talking about a strength, here she's talking about a weakness, and then she's talking about another weakness. Very, very good way of putting the answers. So always, as I teach in class, we use the 𝗶 format. P stands for a strength or weakness, so we begin with one strength, another strength. Always begin the point that way. Now next thing worth seeing, whenever she makes a point, like she's taken a strength of the studies that guideline of deception was followed, immediately after mentioning that this is a strength, she justifies this. So she justifies that they were not deliberately lied to. Although one thing I would say, these type of generic sentences are not required as such. They are not harming the answer in any way. To save time, you could skip them. That's all. But she's explained it well, what she means by not being deceived, and then she contextualizes it. So something she had missed in another part in the paper, but here she's done it. They were told that they would be asked questions, they would be shown some photographs. So here also, following the 𝗶 format, she keeps on naming the points, elaborating on them, contextualizing or putting them in relation to the study. That's exactly how it has to be written. And she completes the point fully before moving to the next strength. So next strength, she talks about standardization. Again, contextualizes it by giving examples from the study. Again, it's a little lengthy, like whenever we take a standardization point, 1 or 2 examples of how the procedure was standardized would be good, but she gives something extra, no problem, does not harm the answer. She mentions about replicability. Again, like I said, reliability, replicability, both go hand in hand, and examiners do mention that both should be written about in the same answer. So she does that, she's careful. Then you see one weakness, she mentions the experimental design. She shouldn't have used an abbreviation here. She should have written repeated measures design. But that's okay. I mean, these are minor mistakes, she can correct them. Then she justifies why repeated measures design is a problem, because she explains that there were some like popular cartoon characters and they were alternating between those cartoon characters. So what we don't know is that, you know, they might be better in identifying, like she's mentioned 2D characters, and she's saying that the videos were in 3D. Like we've seen, this is a problem of the study. the format of the video and the photographs are little different. So it could be the children were really young, so some difficulty in seeing, okay, it's 3D and getting into 2D. After that, that could be little difficult. So she's explained that, and always when there's a problem with the design, it reduces validity. So she's made sure to conclude by saying, okay, validity is poor. Here, though, it's not fully wrong to say that this is because of repeated measures design, because she's trying to say they have to watch the video and the photographs. Still, a little improvement here could have been that instead of saying this is a weakness of repeated measures design, it's a problem with the design of the study as such, not with the experimental design. Or we could say this is a problem of the way material is presented in the study. That would make the point little more clear and relevant. But this is also fine. What she's written is correct. The main thing, she's explained very well and she's linked it back to the question. And finally, you can see another weakness that she's mentioned is that there is some amount of lack of standardization. Something she had mentioned in the standardization answer also earlier. So she says that that could reduce reliability and replicability. Again, the same thing, explaining the point very well and linking it back. She's covered the named issue. Validity she has covered in the previous point that we saw. So that's really good. One suggestion examiners give is that if we can address the named issue right away, that's very helpful, especially in A2 more than AS. So in case you intend to take the point like validity as a strength, if you take it as the first one in the essay, that's the best thing. But what she's done, because she's organized in terms of strengths and weaknesses, she's taken it as the first weakness rather than the first strength. That's a very good approach too. I always teach that you should cover strengths and weaknesses, different points in different paragraphs, and you should move in order of strengths and weaknesses. Everything like this adds to organization and readability. So she's done it really well. I would give this a 9 out of 10. I would like to give it 10, but just because of the slight confusion here, I'm giving it 9. Otherwise, it's a very well written answer. Students ask me, is it possible to score 10 out of 10 on a full marker, 10 marker? Absolutely it is. It's very easy in fact, because you can be ready with these type of answers. So make sure even you write in such specifics and details just like the student has. As I mentioned earlier, I want to keep this video brief, so I'm not going into the details. This is what I had to share about the answers in this lesson. I hope this has been helpful to you. And I'll try to make similar videos in the future which are about answer writing and exam orientation. Okay, so see you in another video then. Thank you for watching.